At 6:47 a. on January 14, 1945, Hauptfeldwebel Maria Brenner stood in the Camp Hearne infirmary watching Dr. Helen Crawford press a stethoscope against Gefreite Anna Schmidt's chest. The room smelled of carbolic disinfectant and something else. Sickness. The kind that comes from the body consuming itself. Anna lay on the examination table wearing a thin cotton undershirt. Her collarbones jutted like fence posts. Her ribs showed through pale skin. The scale behind her read 89 pounds. 3 months ago, it had read 118. Dr. Crawford pulled the stethoscope away and made a note on her clipboard. She didn't look at Maria, just wrote numbers in careful script. Heart rate, blood pressure, respiration, all declining. Anna was the 18th woman showing malnutrition symptoms. Camp Hearne held 23 female prisoners total. 18 out of 23 meant the problem wasn't individual. It was systemic. Cold air seeped through gaps in the window frame. Texas winter wasn't Minnesota winter, but it was cold enough. Anna's breath came shallow and quick. Her hands trembled. Not from fear, from protein deficiency. The body breaking down muscle tissue to fuel basic functions. Dr. Crawford had explained it to Maria 2 weeks ago using medical terms that all meant the same thing: starvation. Maria watched Anna's chest rise and fall, counted the breaths, 22 per minute, too fast. The body working harder to pull oxygen from blood that didn't have enough iron to carry it properly. At current ration levels, the women had maybe 8 weeks before serious organ damage began, maybe less for the smaller women like Anna. Dr. Crawford finally looked up. Her face showed nothing. Professional detachment. The kind doctors learned when they couldn't fix the problem. Same as the others, she said. Severe malnutrition, hair loss, amenorrhea, decreased bone density. I'm documenting it in her file. Will documenting it feed her? Maria asked in English. Her accent was thick, but the words were clear. She'd learned English from American guards over 14 months of captivity. Dr. Crawford set down her clipboard. I've reported this to Captain Richardson 4 times. He's submitted formal requests to POW Command in San Antonio. They keep denying additional rations. Wartime supply constraints. So we starve under regulation compliance. I didn't make the rules, Sergeant. Maria looked at Anna. The girl was 19 years old. She'd been a file clerk in Tunis, never fired a weapon, never hurt anyone. Now she was dying because the Geneva Convention calculated food requirements based on male labourers, and no one thought to adjust the formula for women. The problem was quantifiable. Standard POW rations equaled 2,400 calories per day, designed for men performing manual labour in cotton fields. Male prisoners at Camp Hearne worked 8-hour shifts picking cotton or clearing land. They burned those calories and more. Female prisoners were prohibited from field labour under Article 27 of the Geneva Convention. They performed light duties only: laundry, cleaning, kitchen work. They burned maybe 1,600 calories per day. 2,400 minus 1,600 should have left an 800-calorie surplus. Should have meant the women gained weight. But it didn't work that way. The rations weren't 800 calories of excess. They were 2,400 calories of the wrong kind, mostly carbohydrates. Bread, potatoes, rice. Not enough protein, not enough fat. Not enough of the nutrients female bodies needed. The male prisoners supplemented their diet with food they earned through labour, extra rations for extra work. The women had no mechanism to earn more food. They just got thinner. Maria had watched it happen slowly. First, the energy dropped. Women who used to talk through meals sat silent. Then the hair started falling out. Brushes clogged with blonde and brown strands. Then the monthly bleeding stopped. Then the bones started showing. Wrists too thin. Ankles like sticks. Faces turning skeletal. And no one cared because the regulations said 2,400 calories was adequate. Dr. Crawford helped Anna sit up. The girl swayed. Maria moved to steady her, but Dr. Crawford waved her off. She can manage. Anna slid off the table. Her legs shook. She was a radio operator once. Fast fingers on Morse code keys. Now she could barely stand. She shuffled toward the door. Each step looked like it cost something. When Anna was gone, Dr. Crawford turned to Maria. I need you to understand something. If we don't find a solution in the next 60 days, we'll have our first fatality. Probably Anna. Her body mass index is below 15. That's concentration camp territory. Maria said nothing. Concentration camp was a word that meant different things depending on who spoke it. Dr. Crawford meant it medically. Maria knew it meant something else entirely, something neither of them would discuss. I'm telling you this because you're the ranking prisoner, Dr. Crawford continued. The other women listen to you. If you have any ideas, any solutions, now would be the time. Maria looked at the examination table, at the scale, at the medical charts on the wall showing optimal weights and body mass indices, charts that assumed everyone was the same, charts that assumed regulations made sense. I will think about it, Maria said. She walked out of the infirmary into cold morning air. The sky was grey. The camp yard was empty except for 2 guards walking the fence line. Camp Hearne sat on 300 acres of flat Texas land 8 miles northeast of the town of Hearne in Robertson County. It had housed German prisoners since 1943. First men captured in North Africa, then men captured in Italy and France. The male prisoners lived in separate barracks on the east side of the camp. They worked in the cotton fields. They ate their rations and earned more through labor, and nobody worried about them starving. The female prisoners lived in 2 barracks on the west side. 23 women. Luftwaffe auxiliaries, military nurses, clerical staff. Captured in Tunisia and Sicily and Italy. Sent to America because the British camps were full. Sent to Texas because Camp Hearne had space and nobody knew what else to do with them. Maria walked to the women's barracks. Inside, 18 women lay on cots or sat listlessly. 3 were in the latrine. 2 were on cleaning duty. Nobody talked. Talking required energy they didn't have. Gefreiter Elsa Hoffmann sat on her cot, mending a uniform. Before the war, she'd been a nurse in Hamburg. Good hands. Steady. Now her hands shook so badly she kept missing stitches. Obergefreiter Greta Zimmer lay on her cot, staring at the ceiling. Former clerk. 26 years old. She'd stopped speaking 3 days ago. Just lay, there. Eyes open. Not crying. Not sleeping. Just existing. This was the human cost. 18 women. 18 bodies shutting down. 18 people who'd done nothing except get caught in a war, and now they were dying because a regulation written by men in Washington didn't account for female metabolism. Maria sat on her own cot, pulled out a piece of paper and a pencil, started making calculations. 2,400 calories, 1,600 burned. 800 surplus that wasn't really surplus because the nutritional composition was wrong. The women needed protein, needed fat, needed vitamins that came from fresh vegetables and meat. The male prisoners got those things by earning extra rations through labor. 1 hour of cotton picking equaled 50 additional calories. 8 hours equaled 400 calories. Plus, the male prisoners received occasional care packages from German-American communities. Plus, they traded cigarettes and small items for food from guards. The women had none of that. Article 27 prohibited them from field labor. They received no care packages because nobody knew they existed. They had nothing to trade. Captain James Richardson had tried. Maria had seen the denial letters. 4 formal requests between October and January, each one carefully worded, each one citing Geneva Convention Article 26, which mandated adequate nutrition for prisoners of war. Each one denied with the same response. Current rations meet minimum caloric requirements as determined by the theatre commander. Additional allocations cannot be approved due to wartime supply constraints. The bureaucratic wall was perfect. The regulations protected everyone except the prisoners they were supposed to help. Maria set down her pencil. Looked around the barracks. 18 dying women. 5 healthy enough to still function but showing early symptoms. Hair thinning. Energy dropping. Give them 2 months, and they'd be like Anna. Give them 3 months, and Dr. Crawford would be filling out death certificates. The problem needed a solution. Solutions came from identifying broken components and fixing them. Maria had learned that from her father. Before the war, she'd worked at his electronics repair shop in Stuttgart. People brought broken radios and she fixed them. Every problem had a solution if you could identify which part wasn't working. So, what was the broken part here? The rations were insufficient. That was the symptom, not the cause. The cause was that women couldn't earn additional food, couldn't perform labor that generated extra rations. That was the broken component. Article 27. The regulation that prohibited female prisoners from manual agricultural labor. You couldn't fix a regulation. But maybe you could work around it. Maria thought about the male prisoners. They earned food through labor. Physical labor. Cotton picking, land clearing, construction. Work that required muscle and generated value for local farmers who paid the US government for prisoner labor. The women couldn't do that work. But physical labor wasn't the only kind of labor with value. Maria stood. Walked to the window. Looked out at the camp yard. Beyond the fence line she could see flat Texas land stretching to the horizon. Cotton fields, cattle pastures, farms, all undermanned because American men were fighting overseas. The farms needed labor. The farms needed knowledge. Maria had knowledge. She was a Luftwaffe signals specialist. She knew radio operations, Morse code, communications protocols. Knowledge the German military had spent 2 years training her to use. Knowledge that had value. What if she traded that knowledge? Not for money, not for special treatment, just for food. For agricultural expertise that would let the women grow their own supplemental rations. It was insane. It violated German military code. Fraternization with enemy civilians was forbidden. Sharing military knowledge was treason. The German prisoners at other camps would call her a traitor. Would say she betrayed the Reich. But the Reich had put her in a signals unit she didn't want to join. The Reich had sent her to Tunisia, where she got captured. The Reich wasn't feeding her now. The Reich was 7,000 miles away and didn't care if she lived or died. She cared. She wanted to live. She wanted the other 22 women to live. If trading radio knowledge for farming knowledge kept them alive, she'd trade it. The decision crystallized, clear and cold and practical. Maria walked out of the barracks, crossed the camp yard to the administration building, knocked on Captain Richardson's office door. "Come in." Richardson sat behind a desk, covered in paperwork. He was 42 years old, career Army, competent but not ambitious, the kind of officer who followed regulations and hoped everything worked out. He looked tired. Running a POW camp wasn't glorious duty. It was administrative hell. "Sergeant Brenner," he said. "What can I do for you?" Maria stood at attention. Not because regulations required it, but because old habits died hard. "I have a proposal, Captain." Richardson gestured to a chair. "Sit." She sat, folded her hands in her lap. "The women need food. We cannot work in the fields, but we can work with our minds." Richardson waited. "I am a radio operator," Maria continued. "I know Morse code, signal protocols, radio repair. I can teach these things." "Teach them to who?" "To your farmers, to local civilians. In exchange, they teach us agriculture. They teach us to grow food on camp land. We feed ourselves." Richardson leaned back in his chair. "That's fraternization. That's unauthorized knowledge transfer between prisoners and civilians." "You already know radio," Maria said. "I teach nothing you don't have. Every American military base has radio operators. I share no secrets. But your farmers, they know soil. They know Texas. They know what grows here in winter. We don't. That knowledge has value to us. The regulations prohibit prisoner-civilian contact, except under supervised work details. then supervise it. Call it cultural education exchange. Article 38 of the Geneva Convention permits educational activities that promote prisoner welfare. Growing food promotes welfare. Richardson picked up a pencil, tapped it against his desk. He was thinking, that was good. Thinking meant he wasn't dismissing it immediately. If I authorize this, and it goes wrong, I face a court-martial, he said. If you don't authorize it and women die, you face a court-martial for failing to provide adequate care, Maria replied. You have tried official channels, they failed. Now you try unofficial channels. If it works, you take credit. If it fails, you blame the German prisoner who manipulated you. Richardson almost smiled. Almost. You've thought this through. I want to live, Captain. That makes me think clearly. He set down the pencil, looked at the denial, letters stacked on his desk. 4 rejections from POW command. 4 pieces of paper that said regulations mattered more than lives. I'll need to approve the participants, he said. I choose which civilians are invited. You teach only what I authorize. No political discussions, no personal relationships. Purely technical exchange. Agreed. And if this creates problems, it stops immediately. Agreed. Richardson pulled out a fresh piece of paper. Started making notes. There's a rancher 8 miles north. McKinnon. Good man. Lost his wife 2 years ago. He might be willing to help. And there's a Polish woman who runs a truck farm. And a colored fellow who grows vegetables on shares. I'll reach out to them. Maria stood. Thank you, Captain. Don't thank me yet. This might not work. It will work. It has to. She walked out of his office. Across the camp yard. Back to the barracks. The 18 women still lay on their cots. Still silent. Still dying slowly. Maria looked at them and thought about what she'd just done. She'd violated German military code. She'd proposed fraternization with the enemy. She'd offered to trade knowledge for food like some kind of collaborator. But she didn't feel like a traitor. She felt like an engineer who'd identified the broken component and found a way to bypass it. In 8 days, she'd meet the Texas farmers who would change everything. She'd stand at a fence with a radio transmitter and teach Morse code to a cattle rancher named Dale McKinnon. She'd trade dots and dashes for knowledge about clay soil and winter planting windows. And in 4 months, she'd harvest 340 pounds of vegetables from a 1/4-acre plot that regulations said women couldn't work. But she didn't know any of that yet. Right now, she just knew she'd found a solution. A broken regulation and a way around it. Sometimes, survival was that simple. Identify the problem. Fix what you can. Trade what you have for what you need. Maria sat on her cot. Closed her eyes. For the first time in 3 months, she felt something other than hunger. She felt hope. At 2:15 p.m., on January 22, 1945, 5 civilians stood 15 feet from the barbed wire fence at Camp Hearne's west perimeter. They looked uncomfortable. Not scared, just uncertain. Like people who'd been invited to a party but didn't know the host. Captain Richardson stood between the civilians and the fence. On the other side of the wire, Maria Brenner waited with 4 other German women. Elsa Hoffmann, Greta Zimmer, Anna Schmidt, and Marguerite Klein. The healthiest of the 23 prisoners. The ones who could still stand for an hour without collapsing. Richardson cleared his throat. Folks, I appreciate you coming. As I explained when I contacted you, we're implementing a cultural education exchange program. It's authorized under Article 38 of the Geneva Convention. The purpose is to promote prisoner welfare through skill sharing. One of the civilians, a man in his 50s with sun-weathered skin and work-worn hands, spoke up. Captain, with respect, what exactly are we doing here? Teaching agriculture, Mr. Hughes, in exchange for communications training. Another man, younger, maybe 35, wearing a clean work shirt and denim pants, said, We're teaching Nazis how to farm? Richardson's jaw tightened. We're teaching prisoners of war how to grow supplemental food so they don't starve. There's a difference. The younger man said nothing. just looked at the women behind the wire like they were something strange and dangerous. Maria stepped forward. She carried a portable radio transmitter, standard German military equipment. Richardson had authorized it for demonstration purposes. She set it on the ground near the fence. "This is Morse code," she said in English. Her accent made the words sound formal, precise. Dots and dashes. "I will teach you to hear the difference. You will teach us to grow food in Texas dirt." Silence. The 5 civilians stared at her. The women behind her said nothing. The younger man in the clean shirt broke the silence. "I'm Dale McKinnon. I run cattle on 320 acres north of here." He pointed at the radio. "That thing going to help my cattle?" "No," Maria said. "But knowing Morse code means you can communicate when telephone lines fail, means you can signal for help across distance, means you have a skill." McKinnon considered this. "And what do I teach you?" "How to make things grow in Texas. What crops survive winter. How to manage water. How to keep soil from turning to dust." A woman in the civilian group stepped forward. She was maybe 40, stocky, with strong hands and graying hair pulled back in a bun. "I'm Martha Kowalski. I came from Poland in 1921. I grow vegetables on 12 acres. She looked directly at Maria. "What do you grow in Germany?" "Potatoes. Cabbage. Things that survive cold. This is Texas. Cold is different here. Cold and then hot. Soil is clay. Holds water wrong. You plant like Germany. Everything dies." Maria nodded. "Then you teach us to plant like Texas." Another civilian stepped forward. He was Chinese, late 30s, wearing farmer's overalls. "Robert Chen. My family grows vegetables on leased land. I know winter crops, lettuce, spinach, carrots, things that like cool weather." He paused. "My cousin died at Bataan. Japanese put him in a camp. He starved there." Maria met his eyes. "I am not Japanese. I am not responsible for what they did. I know. But you understand why I'm here cautious?" "Yes." The 4th civilian was a black man, maybe 45, with grey at his temples and hands that showed decades of farm work. He didn't step forward. Just spoke from where he stood. "Samuel Washington. I grow on shares. 20 acres of cotton, 5 acres of vegetables. Mostly tomatoes." He looked at Richardson. "Captain, you sure about this? About us teaching enemy? Prisoners?" "I'm sure we have 23 women who are starving under proper rations because the regulations don't account for female metabolism," Richardson said. "I'm sure that if we don't find a solution, I'll be filling out death certificates by March. I'm sure that the law says I have to provide adequate care, and right now I'm failing. So yes, Mr. Washington, I'm sure." Washington nodded slowly. "All right then." The 5th civilian, Vernon Hughes, the older man who'd spoken first, said, "I lost 2 sons at Normandy. June 6th, last year, both of them on Omaha Beach." He looked at the German women. "You know about Normandy?" Maria hesitated, then said, "Yes, we know. My boys were 19 and 22. Good boys. They didn't want to fight. They got drafted. They went anyway because that's what you do." Hughes's voice stayed level. No anger. Just fact. "I hate the Nazis. I hate what they did to Europe. I hate that my sons died stopping them. But I look at you, women, and I don't see soldiers. I see prisoners who look like they're dying, and I figure my boys would want me to help. So I'm here." No one spoke. The January wind moved across the flat Texas land. Cold but not bitter, just enough to make people pull their collars tight. Maria picked up the radio transmitter. "I will demonstrate Morse code. Then Mr. Hughes will demonstrate soil composition. We work 30 minutes each. We meet 3 times per week. We share knowledge. No politics. No war talk. Just skills." She activated the transmitter, adjusted the frequency, tapped out a simple sequence. Dit da dit, dit, dit da dit dit. The letter R, then E, then L. This spells rel. Each letter has a pattern. Short signals are dits. Long signals are dars. 26 letters. You learn the patterns. You learn to communicate. McKinnon moved closer to the fence. How long to learn it? To hear it clearly? 2 weeks. To send it accurately? 1 month. To send it fast? 3 months. Next time your truck breaks down 15 miles from your ranch house, and there's no telephone, you know how to signal for help using any electrical device. Next time there's a storm and power lines fail, you can still communicate. McKinnon nodded. Fair enough. Maria spent the next 30 minutes demonstrating basic Morse code. She tapped out letters on the transmitter, had the civilians listen to the patterns, had them repeat the sounds back to her. Dit da for A, da dit 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 for B, da dit for C. It was slow work. The civilians had no training in audio recognition. They mixed up the patterns, called dars dits and dits dars. But they tried. That mattered. After 30 minutes, Maria stopped, looked at Vernon Hughes. Now you teach. Hughes walked closer to the fence, bent down and picked up a handful of Texas soil. This is Robertson County dirt. High clay content, alkaline, poor drainage. You plant like you're in Europe. The clay chokes the roots. The water sits on top instead of soaking through. You get root rot. Maria and the other women listened. Elsa took notes on a scrap of paper. You want to grow vegetables here, you need to amend the soil, Hughes continued. Mix in organic matter, compost, manure, anything that breaks up the clay and adds nutrients. You need a 3-to-1 ratio. 3 parts clay soil to 1 part organic amendment. You also need to build raised rows so water drains away from the roots. How high? Maria asked. 6 inches. 8 is better. We have no tools. No amendments. Hughes looked at Richardson. Captain, the women need tools to work the ground. They need amendments to fix the soil. They need seeds, Richardson said. I can't authorize expenditure of army funds for prisoner garden supplies. I'm not asking you to, McKinnon said. He'd been quiet during Hughes's explanation, but now he spoke up. I've got spare tools at my ranch. Garden hose, rakes, hand cultivators. Seeds from last season. I'll bring them. Thursday. Maria looked at him. You will be repaid. When the war ends, I will send money from Germany. McKinnon shook his head. I don't want money. I want you to survive. Something shifted in that moment. The transaction became something else. Not business, not charity. Something harder to name. The session ended at 3:30 p.m. The civilians left. The women walked back to their barracks. That night, Maria lay on her cot, thinking about soil composition and clay content, and Morse code patterns. Thinking about 5 strangers who had no reason to help except basic human decency. 2 days later, on January 24th, McKinnon returned. He brought 2 garden hose, 3 rakes, a wheelbarrow full of horse manure, and a canvas bag of seeds, lettuce, spinach, carrots, turnips, onions. Richardson inspected everything, authorized it, told Maria, "You've got your supplies. Now let's see if this works." The women began on January 25th. They marked out a 1/4-acre plot behind their barracks. Ground that had never been cultivated, just scrubland and weeds. They started clearing it, pulled weeds by hand, used the hose to break up the surface. The clay soil resisted. Hard and compacted. It took 4 women working in shifts to clear 10 square feet. By the end of the first day, they'd cleared 40 square feet. They were exhausted, hands blistered, backs aching, but they'd moved dirt. They'd started something. The radio lessons continued. 3 times per week. Maria taught Morse code. McKinnon taught about water management. Hughes taught about planting depth. Kowalski taught about row spacing. Chen taught about companion planting. Washington taught about pest control. The knowledge flowed both ways. The civilians learned to send their names in Morse code. McKinnon mastered his first. Da dit da for D, dit da for A, dit da dit for L, dit for E. He practiced tapping it out on his truck dashboard while driving home. The women learned that Texas winter was different from European winter. Learned that lettuce could grow in January if you planted it right. Learned that carrots needed loose soil, and onions needed shallow planting, and spinach needed consistent water. By February 1st, the women had cleared and amended the entire quarter-acre plot. The clay soil mixed with horse manure turned darker, richer. They built raised rows 6 inches high. Measured the spacing. 12 inches between lettuce rows. 18 inches for carrots. 24 inches for turnips. They planted on February 3rd and 4th. 340 linear feet of rows. Lettuce in the northern section. Carrots in the east. Turnips and onions scattered throughout. Spinach as a border crop. Then they waited. February in Robertson County was unpredictable. Cold mornings, warm afternoons. Occasional rain. The women watered the garden by hand using buckets. They carried water from the camp well, 40 trips per day, 8 gallons per trip, 320 gallons total. Their arms ached, but they kept carrying. On February 11th, 7 days after planting, the first sprouts appeared, tiny lettuce shoots, green needles breaking through dark soil. Anna Schmidt saw them first. She called Maria over, pointed with a shaking hand. Look. Maria bent down, touched one of the shoots, delicate and alive and growing. Behind her, Elsa started crying, not loud, just quiet tears running down her face. Greta, who hadn't spoken in weeks, said one word, life. Doctor. Crawford came to see the garden that afternoon. She walked the rows, examined the sprouts, made notes in her medical log. Psychological impact is already significant, she told Richardson. The women are more alert, more engaged. Having a purpose changes brain chemistry. Richardson nodded. Let's hope it produces food too. By February 14th, the sprouts were everywhere. Lettuce, spinach, carrots. The rows showed green lines against dark soil. The women worked the garden, every morning. Weeding, watering, checking for pests. They had something to do besides lie on cots and slowly die. The radio lessons expanded. McKinnon started bringing broken equipment from his ranch. A radio with a faulty vacuum tube. A telegraph key that stuck. Maria fixed them. Her hands steady and sure despite months of poor nutrition. She diagnosed problems by touch and sound. Replaced components. Tested circuits. Made things work again. McKinnon watched her hands move. Watched her take apart a radio receiver and identify the failed capacitor in 30 seconds. Where'd you learn that? My father. He owns a repair shop in Stuttgart. I worked there from age 14. You good at it? Yes. What would you be doing now if there was no war? Maria didn't answer immediately. She finished soldering a connection, tested it, reassembled the radio casing. Then she said, University, engineering degree, then working with my father, building better radios, better equipment. Him, the repaired radio. Instead, I am prisoner in Texas teaching Morse code for vegetables. You regret it? I regret the war. I don't regret the vegetables. McKinnon smiled slightly. Fair enough. The food started coming on February 15th, not as payment, as gifts. Chen brought a basket of bok choy. Washington brought a tin of cornbread wrapped in cloth. Kowalski brought pierogi, still warm. Hughes brought jars of preserves his late wife had made. Richardson saw it happening. Technically, it violated fraternization protocols. Technically, he should stop it. But the women were eating. Their faces showed more color. Their hands shook less. He looked the other way. Maria accepted the food with quiet dignity. Divided it equally among all 23 women. Made sure Anna and the weakest prisoners got extra portions. The food wasn't much. A few extra 100 calories per week. But combined with the improved morale from the garden, It made a difference. By February 21st, 3 weeks after planting, the garden showed substantial growth. The lettuce was 4 inches tall, the spinach was spreading, the carrot tops were feathery green. Still weeks from harvest, but visibly alive and thriving. The relationship between prisoners and civilians was evolving. The conversations extended beyond technical instruction. During the February 24th session, Hughes asked Maria, "Why'd you join the Luftwaffe?" Maria looked at him across the fence. "I didn't join. They conscripted me in 1942. I was 25. They needed radio operators. They took women who knew electronics. I knew electronics. You believe in Hitler? In what they're doing over there?" The question hung in the cold air. Maria could refuse to answer, could cite Geneva Convention protections, could say it wasn't relevant. But Hughes had lost 2 sons. He deserved honesty. "I believe in not starving," Maria said. "I believe in surviving. I believe my father is still alive in Stuttgart and I will see him again. Everything else is politics, and I have no use for politics." Hughes nodded. "Fair enough," McKinnon asked. "What will you do when the war ends?" "Return to Germany. Rebuild my father's shop. Fix radios. Forget I was ever a soldier." "Germany's going to be rubble," McKinnon said quietly. "You know that, right? Whole country's getting bombed to dirt." Maria said nothing for a long moment. Then, "Yes, I know." The admission cost her something. McKinnon saw it in her face. The knowledge that she had nothing to return to. That her country was being destroyed while she grew lettuce in Texas. That survival here might be all she had left. He didn't press, just moved the conversation to safer ground. "Show me that radio repair technique again, the one with the capacitor." March brought warmer weather. The garden grew faster. The women worked the rows every morning. The lettuce was now 8 inches tall. The spinach was ready for thinning. The carrots showed, orange crowns pushing through soil. Another 2 weeks, and they could start harvesting. The radio lessons became more advanced. McKinnon was learning signal direction finding. Chen was practicing radio repair. Washington had mastered Morse code at 12 words per minute. Kowalski was teaching Greta how to read in English using vegetable seed packets as primers. The barriers were breaking down. Not dramatically. Not with speeches about peace and understanding. Just slowly, through shared work and mutual respect. Through teaching and learning and eating together. On March 3rd, after the regular session ended, the civilians lingered. They'd started doing that, staying to talk after the formal instruction finished. Richardson tolerated it as long as conversations stayed away from politics and war. Vernon Hughes leaned against the fence post. "You women know how to play cards?" Maria said, "Some games." "Why?" "Thought maybe next week we could bring a deck. Teach you poker. Just for entertainment. No gambling." Captain Richardson would allow this. Hughes looked at Richardson, who was standing 20 feet away, pretending not to listen. "Captain, cards acceptable?" Richardson sighed. "As long as it remains recreational and supervised, I'll allow it." So the following week they played cards. Sat on opposite sides of the fence, passing a deck back and forth. The civilians taught the women 5-card draw. The women taught the civilians scat, a German trick-taking game. Nobody kept score. It was just something to do besides talk about the war. McKinnon sat across from Maria during the games. He noticed details. How she calculated odds. How she read other players. How her mind worked through problems systematically. Engineer's mind. Methodical and precise. "You're good at this," he said, after she won 3 hands in a row. "It's mathematics. Probability and observation. You always this analytical? It keeps me alive." McKinnon thought about that. About what it took to survive as a woman in a military that didn't want women. As a prisoner in a foreign country. As someone starving under regulations that said she was fed adequately. "Seems like a hard way to live," he said. Maria looked at him. "What is the alternative?" He didn't have an answer. On March 28th, 4 months after arriving at Camp Hearne, Maria walked into the garden at dawn and saw that the lettuce was ready. The heads were full and tight, 6 to 8 inches across, perfect harvest size. She gathered the other women. They harvested carefully, used knives to cut the lettuce at ground level, left the roots in soil to decompose and add nutrients. They filled 8 wooden crates with lettuce, leaf lettuce and romaine. Green and fresh and alive. Dr. Crawford came to weigh the harvest, set up a scale in the camp kitchen, weighed each crate, recorded the totals. 134 pounds of lettuce, from a quarter-acre plot worked by starving women who weren't supposed to be able to grow anything. Richardson witnessed the weighing, documented it officially, filed a report with POW Command. Female prisoner population at Camp Hearne has initiated successful agricultural project. First harvest yielded 134 pounds of lettuce. Prisoners show improved health outcomes. Request permission to expand program. He sent the report on March 30th, waited for response. None came. POW command was drowning in paperwork from 500 camps across the United States. One report about vegetables in Texas didn't register as priority. The silence was permission. Richardson interpreted it that way. The exchange program continued. The women divided the lettuce equally. Each prisoner received 5.8 pounds. First fresh vegetables since December. They ate lettuce with every meal, lettuce in sandwiches, lettuce as salad, lettuce wilted in hot water as cooked greens. Within 10 days, Dr. Crawford noted measurable improvement. Energy levels increased. Hair stopped falling out. Anna Schmidt gained 4 pounds in 2 weeks. The other women showed similar gains. The garden kept producing. Spinach was ready in early April, 83 pounds. Carrots came in mid-April, 71 pounds. Turnips in late April, 52 pounds. By the end of April, the total harvest reached 340 pounds, distributed equally among 23 women over 5 weeks. That was 14.8 pounds per woman, roughly 3 pounds per week of fresh vegetables, as supplement to standard rations. 3 pounds per week didn't sound like much, but it was enough. Combined with the occasional gifts from civilians and improved morale from purposeful work, it was enough to reverse the malnutrition crisis. By May 1st, all 23 women were at healthy weight. Dr. Crawford's medical report stated, 0 malnutrition cases in female POW population. Prisoner-initiated agricultural program has successfully eliminated nutrition-related health issues. Richardson read the report and thought about regulations and how sometimes the best solutions came from people who ignored them. On May 8th, Germany surrendered. The news reached Camp Hearne at 9:20 a.m. Guards celebrated. Civilians cheered in town. The war in Europe was over. The German prisoners sat in silence. Maria walked to the garden, stood among the growing plants. The spring planting was coming up. More lettuce, more spinach, tomatoes and peppers for summer harvest. She'd planned it all out, calculated the crop rotation, figured out how to keep the garden producing through Texas heat. But now the war was over, which meant repatriation, which meant going home to Stuttgart and rubble, and a father who might be dead. McKinnon found her there at 2 p.m. He stood on his side of the fence. She stood on hers. Neither spoke for a while. Finally, McKinnon said, "It's over." "Yes. What happens now?" "I don't know." Another silence. Then, McKinnon asked, "You want to go back to rubble?" Maria looked at him. At this Texas rancher who'd spent 3 months teaching her about soil and water and how things grow. Who'd brought tools and seeds and horse manure. Who'd learned Morse code and radio repair. Who looked at her like she was a person, not an enemy. "I don't want to," she said, "but I don't have a choice. Maybe you do." Maria didn't understand. Not yet. But she would, because in 2 weeks, McKinnon would ask Richardson about immigration sponsorship, would start a process that would change everything, would offer Maria a choice that regulations said didn't exist, but that was 2 weeks away. Right now, they just stood on opposite sides of a fence in a Texas garden and thought about endings and beginnings and what survival actually meant. At 9:27 a.m., on May 10, 1945, Dale McKinnon sat across from Captain Richardson in the camp administration office and asked a question that had no good answer. What's the process for POWs to stay in the United States after repatriation? Richardson set down his coffee cup, looked at McKinnon like he'd asked about flying to the moon. Stay? They're prisoners of war. They go home. But what if home doesn't exist anymore? What if they have nothing to go back to? The regulations don't care about that. Geneva Convention requires repatriation to country of origin once hostilities cease. So they go back to rubble and starvation. That's not my decision to make. McKinnon leaned forward. What if they had sponsors here, American citizens willing to vouch for them, provide employment, housing, make sure they're not a burden on anyone? Richardson studied him. This is about Sergeant Brenner. This is about 23 women who've done nothing except survive, who worked a garden and taught skills and didn't cause problems. They go back to Germany. They'll die. You know it. I know it. What I know is that immigration law doesn't have provisions for enemy alien POWs to remain in the United States. They have to be repatriated first. Then they can apply for entry through normal channels, which takes years, and requires them to be outside the country during processing. So there's no mechanism. No mechanism. McKinnon stood. Then maybe someone needs to create one. He walked out. Richardson sat alone in his office thinking about regulations that made sense on paper and no sense in reality. That afternoon, McKinnon drove to Hearne, found a payphone, called an attorney in Houston named Harold Greenberg, immigration specialist. McKinnon had never met him, but had gotten his name from a banker in Bryan who said Greenberg was good at finding loopholes. I need to know if enemy POWs can remain in the United States after the war ends, McKinnon said. Greenberg's voice came through the line steady and professional. German or Japanese? German. Female. Captured in North Africa. How many? 23 total. Maybe 11 want to stay. Silence on the line. Then Greenberg said, That's complicated. Current law requires repatriation, but there's talk in Congress about new legislation, the Alien Fiancé and Fiancées Act. It's supposed to allow foreign nationals engaged to U.S. citizens to apply for non-quota immigration status. When does it pass? Maybe June. Maybe never. It's still in committee. If it passes, would it apply to POWs? The language doesn't specifically exclude them, but it doesn't specifically include them either. It would have to be tested in court. How much would that cost? Depends on how far it goes. Could be $500. Could be $5,000. McKinnon did the math in his head. He had money. Not a lot, but enough. The ranch did well. He'd saved during the war years when beef prices were high. I'll call you back, he said. He hung up. Stood in the payphone booth, thinking about 23 women and regulations, and whether one rancher could actually change anything. Then he drove back to Camp Hearne. The garden was producing its second wave. The spring planting had come up strong. More lettuce, more spinach. The women had added tomatoes and peppers. Summer crops that would produce from June through September. They'd calculated the yield. Estimated another 400 pounds of vegetables by autumn. Maria was working the tomato rows when McKinnon arrived. She was tying plants to stakes using strips of cloth. Her hands moved with practiced efficiency. Engineer's hands, precise and sure. I talked to a lawyer, McKinnon said through the fence. Maria didn't look up. Just kept working. About what? About you staying. Now she looked up. That's not possible. Maybe it is. There's a law being written. For foreign fiancés of American citizens. If it passes, it might create a path. Maria set down the cloth strips. Walked to the fence. Fiancés. That means marriage. Yes, You are proposing marriage to a prisoner you've known for 4 months. I'm proposing a solution to a problem. You need a way to stay. I need help on the ranch. We get married, you get citizenship, you can stay. It's practical. Maria studied his face, looking for something. Romance, maybe. Or pity. She didn't find either. Just saw a man making a business calculation. That's not a marriage, she said. It's a partnership. Same as a marriage, just more honest. Then we tried. Maria turned away, looked at the garden, at the rows of vegetables she'd planted and tended and harvested, at the 1/4 acre of Texas land that had kept her alive. I need to think about it, she said. Take your time. But not too long. Repatriation orders could come any day. He left. Maria stood in the garden thinking about partnerships and marriages and what survival actually required. That evening, she gathered the other women, all 23, told them about McKinnon's proposal, about the lawyer, about the possibility that maybe some of them could stay. How many of you want to go back to Germany? She asked. 12 hands went up. Women who had families, parents, siblings, children, women who needed to find out who survived, who couldn't imagine not going home. 11 hands stayed down. Women like Maria who had nothing left, whose families were dead or lost or scattered. Women who saw Texas as better than rubble. For those who want to stay, Maria said, we need American sponsors, citizens who will vouch for us, provide employment or marriage. It's not guaranteed to work. But it's a chance. Elsa Hoffman said, I'll ask Dr. Crawford. She needs a nurse. Greta Zimmer said. Martha Kowalski mentioned needing farm workers. One by one, the 11 women identified potential sponsors, civilians they'd worked with, people who might vouch for them. Maria thought about McKinnon, about his offer, about spending the rest of her life on a Texas cattle ranch with a man she barely knew. It wasn't what she'd wanted, but survival rarely was. The next morning she told him yes. On May 15th, Richardson received the official repatriation orders. All German POWs to be transferred to processing centers by July 15th, then transported to Germany by August 1st. The timeline was clear. The women had 60 days. At 7:03 a.m. on June 3, 1945, Captain Richardson stood in front of 23 German women in the Camp Hearne mess hall and told them they were going home. Repatriation orders came from Washington this morning, he said. You'll be transferred to the processing center in New York by July 15th. Transportation to Germany follows by August 1st. Silence. Then Greta Zimmer asked the question everyone was thinking. What home? Richardson had no answer. He looked at the women, looked at their faces. Healthy faces now, not the skeletal faces from January. The garden had done that. 4 months of vegetables and purpose, and something to live for. I'm sorry, he said. I don't make the policy. Maria stood. What if we refuse? Then you'll be deported anyway. You're enemy aliens. The government has the authority. What if we had American sponsors? Citizens who vouch for us? Richardson sighed. That's not how repatriation works, Sergeant. There's no provision for POWs to remain based on sponsorship. Then maybe there should be. Richardson said nothing. He'd been expecting this. McKinnon had already talked to him twice. The lawyer in Houston had called once. The pressure was building. But pressure didn't change regulations. I'll document your request, Richardson said, but don't expect miracles. That evening, Maria met privately with McKinnon outside the fence. The sun was setting. Orange light stretched across the flat Texas land. The garden showed rows of green against dark soil. Tomatoes were starting to set fruit. Peppers were flowering. The summer harvest would be substantial, but Maria wouldn't be here to see it. Richardson says, there's no mechanism, she told McKinnon. The lawyer says there might be. The Alien Fiancé Act is moving through Congress. Could pass by end of June. Could. Might. Maybe. These words don't help me. McKinnon gripped the fence wire. I'm doing everything I can. I know. But doing everything isn't enough if the law says no. They stood in silence. Two people on opposite sides of wire. Connected by vegetables and radio lessons and 4 months of conversations that weren't supposed to happen. If you go back, McKinnon said, what will you find? Maria had thought about this constantly. Rubble, hunger, maybe my father. Probably not. And if you stay? A life I didn't plan. A country that isn't mine. A marriage that isn't really marriage. But you'd be alive. Yes, I'd be alive. On June 10th, the town of Hearne held a meeting at the First Baptist Church. 87 residents attended. The topic was whether to support the German POWs remaining in Robertson County. The divide was immediate and bitter. A veteran named Thomas Carr stood first. My brother died at Bastogne. You want me to live next to Germans? Work next to them? Pretend we're all friends now? Others agreed. Voices rose. They're Nazis. They're the enemy. Send them back where they came from. Then Vernon Hughes stood. The room quieted. Everyone knew Hughes. Knew he'd lost 2 sons at Normandy. I hate the Nazis as much as anyone here, Hughes said. My boys died stopping them. But these women aren't the ones who killed my sons. They were conscripts, radio operators and nurses. They grew vegetables and taught skills and caused no trouble. If we send them back to starve, what does that make us? Martha Kowalski stood next. I came from Poland in 1921. America gave me a chance. Why can't we give them one? Samuel Washington rose slowly. White folks in this town didn't want me buying land in 1930. Said I was the wrong color. But I bought it anyway. Now you're going to tell me who can stay based on where they're from, based on a war they didn't start. The arguments went back and forth for 90 minutes. Finally, Reverend Thomas Clayton spoke. Matthew 25. Verse 35. He said, I was hungry, and you gave me food. I was thirsty, and you gave me drink. I was a stranger, and you welcomed me. These women were strangers. They grew their own food. They asked for nothing except not to starve. If we send them back to destroyed cities where they'll starve again, what does that say about us? The vote was informal, but clear. 48 residents supported letting the women stay. 39 opposed. The community was split, but there was a majority for compassion. Richardson drafted a formal request on June 12th. Request permission for voluntary repatriation delay pending immigration sponsorship for 11 female POWs at Camp Hearne. He attached medical reports, agricultural data, letters from local sponsors. He sent it through channels to the Provost Marshal General's office in Washington. The response came June 25th. 1 paragraph. Request denied. Repatriation is mandatory under international agreement. All POWs must return to country of origin. No exceptions. McKinnon read the denial in Richardson's office. Read it twice to make sure he understood. Then he called Harold Greenberg. The government denied the request, McKinnon said. I expected that. But I have news. The Alien Fiancé and Fiancées Act passed yesterday. Signed into law by President Truman. Takes effect immediately. Does it cover POWs? The language doesn't explicitly exclude them. But there's a catch. The act requires that the foreign national must be engaged to a U.S. citizen before they can apply for non-quota immigration status. Maria and I are engaged. On paper? Not yet. Get it on paper. Fast. I'll file the immigration petition. But understand something. The government will fight this. They'll argue that enemy, alien POWs don't qualify. This will end up in federal court. How long? Months. Maybe a year. The repatriation order says July 15th. That's 3 weeks. Then we need to get a temporary restraining order blocking the deportation until the immigration petition is resolved. McKinnon hung up. Looked at Richardson. I need to propose to Maria officially. With witnesses. Today. Richardson nodded. I'll authorize a private meeting. At 4:30 p.m., McKinnon and Maria stood on opposite sides of the fence with Richardson and Dr. Crawford as witnesses. McKinnon said, "Maria Brenner, will you marry me when the law allows it?" Maria said, "Yes." Richardson documented it. Signed a statement. Dr. Crawford co-signed. The engagement was official. Greenberg filed the immigration petition on June 27th. Filed the motion for temporary restraining order on June 28th. 4 other farmers proposed to German women they'd worked with. 3 women accepted, 1 declined, saying she needed to find her family in Germany. 6 more women secured employment sponsorships, farms and businesses willing to hire them. 11 women total choosing to fight for the right to stay. On July 10th, federal immigration officials arrived at Camp Hearne. They brought the final ruling: enemy alien POWs cannot marry U.S. citizens until hostilities are officially concluded and they have been repatriated to their home countries. The immigration petitions are invalid. All 23 women will be transferred to New York on July 20th, no exceptions, Richardson argued, cited the letters. The community support, the Alien Fiancé Act, the lead official cut him off. The law is clear, Captain. They're prisoners of war. They go home. That's final. The women learned of the decision that evening. Maria gathered all 23 in the barracks. "We have a choice," she said. "We can go quietly, or we can resist." Several women wanted to fight. Others were afraid. Those who want to stay. "We stay together," Maria said. Those who want to go. No judgment. The count remained the same. 12 women chose to return to Germany. 11 chose to resist. On July 15th, transfer day arrived. Federal marshals came with transport trucks. The 12 women who'd chosen repatriation boarded without resistance, said goodbye to the others, some crying, some silent, all understanding they might never see each other again. Then the marshals turned to the 11 remaining women. "Time to go," the lead marshal said. Maria and the 10 other women sat in the camp yard, arms linked, silent. "We will not leave," Maria said. "We have sponsors. We have work. We have committed no crimes." The marshals threatened forced removal. Then vehicles appeared on the road to camp. Trucks and cars. 40 local residents, including McKinnon, Hughes, Kowalski, Chen, and Washington. They walked through the camp gates, formed a human chain between the women and the transport trucks. The standoff lasted 4 hours. Finally, Richardson negotiated a compromise. Give them 30 days. Let them apply for immigration through proper channels. If denied, they go peacefully. The lead marshal considered. Forced removal would create a public relations disaster. 30 days. Administrative hold. But if the petitions are denied, they go without resistance. Agreed? Maria looked at the faces of the people standing between her and deportation, looked at McKinnon, at Vernon Hughes, who'd lost 2 sons, at Martha Kowalski, who remembered being an immigrant herself. Agreed, she said. The marshals left. The 11 women remained at Camp Hearne under administrative hold. The legal battle had just begun, but for 30 days they had hope.